Good afternoon. I hope you have been enjoying this lovely day today. I am Bob Pritchard, the Vice President of the Middlesex County, Virginia Museum and Historical Society. And I am honored today to engage in a conversation and present Professor Julia Ann King, who is the chair of the Department of Anthropology at St. Mary's College in Southern Maryland. She has earned degrees from William and Mary, from Florida State in anthropology, and from the University of Pennsylvania, a Ph.D. in historical anthropology, and is the former president of the Society for Historical Archaeology. She, in 2018, won 2 awards. One was, I think, in virtue of the fact that even though she's resident in Maryland, she has undertaken investigations up and down the Middle Peninsula and the Northern Neck and some other places in Virginia. And so she won in 2018 the out-of-state award from the Archaeological Society of Virginia. And she also won a Lifetime Contribution Award from the Society of Historical Archaeology. So we're very happy to have her with us today. And the title of her talk will be Mapping the Rappahannock Indigenous Cultural Landscape. Professor King. And you will need to unmute.
Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and share the screen.
And I will stop sharing my screen.
Yes. All right, so let me go ahead. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you today. And let's hope that the technology gods, and I hear there is a technology god on with us today. So hopefully we'll be okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Is everybody good to go? All right. Well, thank you very much for that great introduction and for inviting me to speak today with you guys. I was going to be here with Chief Ann Richardson. She's the chief of the Rappahannock, but she's under the weather, and she's hoping that she will be able to come at another time soon because she has so much that she wants to talk with you about. I want to just point out to you that these are members of the Rappahannock tribe. This is Chief Ann Richardson. I have some other pictures of her if you don't know her. This is the Assistant Chief, Mark Fortune, and then these are members of the Rappahannock Council. And I'm going to talk today, well, originally we were going to talk about the Chief's House. And the Chief's House, some of you may know this or have heard about it, and I'm going to get to the phones cliffs too in a minute. So, but with the Chief's House, this is a house that's over, I think it's actually in King and Queen County, and it's right on the line between King and Queen and Essex County. And this is where Chief Ann was raised. This is where the Rappahannock tribe reorganized in 1921. The family rented this house. They also rented other houses. It's in an area known as Indian Neck. And you see it as I first saw it in 2018, when Chief Ann said to me, oh, we are going to restore this. And, you know, I've been around the biz for a while, and I'm like, well, never underestimate what Chief Ann has to say, because while we're not going to talk about it today, we got a grant, we got it on the National Register of Historic Places, and they're busy now. You can see where they've hired an architectural historian and an interpreter, and they've started to clear away all those trees. This is a drone shot, and you can see a couple of like places where there are chimneys, but you can also see where there are holes in the roof. So they have their work cut out for them, but they've managed to raise a lot of money. And I hope that you will invite Chief Ann to come back to talk about this project. What I'm going to talk about a little bit today, and what I am really, my expertise is in archaeology. And I first met Chief Ann, I guess, in 2015, when a colleague of mine took me down to meet her in November. And this colleague of mine was with the National Park Service, and they wanted to do a project on mapping the indigenous Rappahannock landscape. It was for the Captain John Smith Chesapeake National Historic Trail. I think I had that right. And we had just finished one in Maryland for the Piscataway. So they asked us if we were interested in doing a project with Rappahannock. And I was like, okay, sure. And I soon learned that it was 2 hours from my home base. But I also learned what an incredible river valley the Rappahannock is. And we got involved in this mapping project, and I realized how little archaeology had been done. There's been some iconic places that have been tested, but not a lot. And I said to Chief Ann, we have got to do some archaeology so that we can really get a sense of what's going on in this landscape. Everything we read about is the Powhatans. And this is not to take away from the Powhatans, but there's a reason we read a lot about the Powhatans. And that's because the colonists invaded their territory and they were in the heart of Powhatan territory. They kind of left the Rappahannock alone. In fact, there were a lot of laws that were passed that said, stay out of the Rappahannock. And so the people in the Rappahannock Valley continue on, not quite like they had before, but they're more unmolested than the people down in the York and James River Valley. And yet what survives for us is what's written or the archaeology. And so archaeology became a really necessary corrective. And Chief Ann saw this. I didn't have to convince her. She already knew this. And here's some pictures of us up on the left, Westmoreland Berry Farm, on the top right, Leedstown, and then down below, a couple of my students trailing a unit in Westmoreland County. All right, so what I want to do today, we were going to talk about the Chief's house, but I want to save that for when you can hear Chief Ann. I thought I want to tell you all about something I've just sort of come across. I'm actually not chair of the department this year because I'm on sabbatical, yay! And it ends soon. But during that sabbatical, I've been at Dumbarton Oaks. I don't know if any of you know it, but it's in Georgetown, part of Harvard University. And they basically let you research whatever you want to research and they don't bother you for months. And so I've been focused on the Rappahannock project, trying to write up all of that archaeological information. So I want to start out with this little anecdote that Chief Ann told me. Some of you, I bet most of you recognized old Robert Beverly here and his History and Present State of Virginia, which was published in 1705. And in that History of Virginia, Beverly, who owned land both on the Mattaponi River and on the Rappahannock River, he describes this native temple, or what is also the indigenous or Algonquin word for it is Quioccasin. And he describes it on his property. And he breaks into it one day with a couple of his friends. And according to Beverly, this Quioccasin was located on his property, but it was in a remote area. It was in the forest. It was far away from the river, whatever river he was talking about. Now I'm using some illustrations to sort of give you a sense of what he describes. He describes this temple as large, it's loaf-shaped, it's covered with woven mats, and it's surrounded by upright posts that are painted with human faces. And it's probably not unlike these posts that John White at Roanoke showed in his watercolors in the late 16th century. Now the temple was partitioned into 2 rooms. This isn't the temple, but this is out of a book that's talking about these kinds of houses. And he describes it as being partitioned. So here's a cutaway. You get a sense of what's going on here. And you've got a small fire pit out in the front. That's this little black area on the floor. And then the inner room he described as containing decorated tomahawks, bundles of human bones that were probably the bones of deceased leaders, and pieces of a carved wooden figure that probably represented one of their spirits known as Oki. And Oki was an important and vengeful Chesapeake Algonquin spirit. and he guided day-to-day decision-making. The Algonquins did not want to upset Oki. And so you read a lot about him. Quioccasin's were places where the Algonquin priest would live. They would carry out religious rituals. They would protect the remains of the deceased leaders. And they would also seek Oki's guidance for living in this world. Now, these were spaces that were off limits to most Indigenous people, and they were absolutely off limits to the English. In fact, while Beverly was, breaking into this Quioccasin, he's worried. He writes that he's worried that the natives are going to come back and discover him in the act of violating the temple. So I give you that sort of little story about the Quioccasin. So in 2016, when we were down there mapping the Rappahannock Indigenous cultural landscape with Chief Ann and the tribe, Chief Ann pointed out to us Quioccasin Creek on the map. You can see Rappahannock River to the right, and then where the red is Quioccasin Creek. Now this is a narrow, virtually hidden creek that meanders for like 3 to 4 miles through the rural Virginia countryside. This is in Essex County, before emptying into the Rappahannock rivers, into the Rappahannock River. Now, in some places, the creek disappears underground and then it resurfaces on its way to the river. And the creek runs through the forest of Blandfield, which was Beverly's Tidewater property. And the tribe's oral history says the temple he's talking about is on Quioccasin Creek. Some people disagree with that. I haven't really drilled down into it, but I can tell you this, whether he was talking about it or not, the fact that it's called Quioccasin Creek should get all of our attention. So 100 years later, at the beginning of the 19th century, remember Old Beverly's there in 1705, at the beginning of the 19th century, as the Rappahannock people came to adopt Christianity, they chose to attend the newly formed Upper Essex Baptist Church, which, interestingly enough, is located at the head of Quioccasin Creek. And Chief Richardson, when she told us about this, said it was not unintentional. In other words, it was intentional. So that really struck me. This striking example of Native memory and place persistence describes this amazing resilience among the Rappahannock people to adapt these new things like Christianity, and then they mix this new intentionally, right? And they creatively build on the old. So here you can see, this is from Google Maps. You can see where the Upper Essex Baptist Church is, and then you can see Quioccasin Creek in this area. Now, the Upper Essex Church on Quioccasin Creek is located in the upland areas of the Rappahannock's ancestral homeland. And this is where the English colonists had driven the indigenous families by the early 18th century. And this landscape, because this is where their headquarters, this is where they live, you see the chief's house, it's an Indian neck, this landscape remains intimately familiar to them. And as part of the collaboration that I had with the tribe, and of course my staff and students were part of that, Chief Richardson and the tribal council wanted to learn more about these places that they referred to as spiritual places, that were either no longer part of tribal memory or that they only superficially recalled. And of course, these places would be in the rich bottomlands of the Rappahannock River, where they had first emerged, where they had lived for 3 or more centuries as Rappahannock people, and then from where they had been pushed sometime after 1650. So Chief Ann told me, she says, we do know of some places that were sacred places on the river, and they were used for burial grounds, but they wanted to know more. And this was all part of the tribe's return to the river program. And that's what the Whole Phones Cliffs project has also been about. And so the tribe embraced archaeology as a way to return to the river. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the archaeological evidence, the GIS technology that we use to recover these landscapes. and how these sacred or spiritual landscapes, I have to constantly have my water bottle by my side, how these landscapes were part of these larger relational landscapes. You'll see that when I lay out the GIS for you. And colonizers, excuse me, the colonizers, the settlers, never saw it. They never, they saw bits and pieces, but they really didn't understand what they were seeing. And often traditional archaeological projects don't always see it either, because we often focus on a single site, right? But in our case, we were focusing on this larger landscape. So we found these spiritual landscapes were actually very intimately integrated into the everyday landscape that the indigenous people were living in. They served as these kinds of repositories of memory. They had their own agency, you know, where indigenous people would look to the landscape for clues and direction on how to live. And these landscapes were not just about the past and memory, but they were also about the future, about rebuilding, renewing, and accessing the power of the spiritual world is to do that. Now, before I delve too much into it, I want to talk about a spiritual landscape that John Smith talks about. It's a stone landscape. And this is a quote that Smith includes in his general history. And he says they, and he means the indigenous people, also have certain altar stones they call pacaranzas. But these stand from their temples, some by their houses, others in the woods and wildernesses where they have had any extraordinary encounter or accident. And as you travel at those stones, they will tell you the cause of why they were erected and from which age to age they used to instruct their children. And he says this is their best records of antiquities, and that they often leave offerings. So these are not at the temples, but they're in this larger relational landscape. Of course, the Tidewater is not really a stone landscape. I mean, you have your Aquia Creek sandstone, you have the sandstone vein that runs through Richmond County. I mean, you have gravel, but most of the landscapes are like this at Fones Cliffs. This is where we were doing some archaeology in 2020 and 2021. This is not the land that the tribe purchased. This is land that's owned by Fish and Wildlife. And we actually did some work out there. It's right next to the parcel. And part of this was to demonstrate, hey, that there is this long indigenous history on these cliffs. I show you this image though, because you can sort of see where it's all sand and gravels and they've just slid down, right? You don't have these stone landscapes like you do in New England, or as you get past the Piedmont, past the fall line. So what we have to work with are wooden things. And I'm sure most, if not all of you on this talk are homeowners, and you know that wooden things in your yard don't survive very long. You don't even need to be a homeowner to know that they decay, that termites, that freezing, thawing, heat, cold, it wrecks wood. And so these wooden things disappear. Monuments like these posts down here. Can you all see my cursor? Just do a thumbs up if you can see the cursor. Is the cursor? Yeah, it looks. And so the cursor is showing you where one of those monuments are, but these things have disappeared. These are all John White's drawings. You can see he's showing these wooden houses that are posts right into the ground, mats, this post palisade. I mean, there's just not much that's going to survive. And so you've got stuff that's not only was invisible to most of the people coming from Europe, but it's now invisible to most of us because it's disappeared from the landscape. So that's where archaeology comes in, right? We go out there and we start digging. These guys are digging what we call shovel tests. They do them every 25 to 50 feet, and they're just looking for artifacts. We're covering great spaces, right? Here, we're actually digging a much larger hole. This is at Fones Cliffs at the Fish and Wildlife. This is a 5x5. These holes that are shovel tests are usually just about 1 foot diameter. but the idea is to cover as much landscape as we can. We also went ahead and went to the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. I'm sure most of you know that place in Richmond, great place. And we went there and we looked at what we call legacy collections, collections that people had collected or excavated back in the day, so to speak. I tell my students, do not use that phrase back in the day. And here I am, back in the day. You know, it's terrible chronology, right? But we're friends here, we get it. And so we looked at the materials at DHR, and then we also talked to landowners and property owners, and they allowed us, we're in some guy's dining room, cataloging his collection so that we can start putting dots on a map of where we're finding ceramics, projectile points, and other kinds of artifacts that we find. We also looked at standing houses. The chief's house is a great example of one of those standing houses. This house was standing at the beginning of the 20th century. This was in the now National Museum of the American Indian. It's part of the Frank Speck collection. But check out this daub and frame chimney. But this is a Rappahannock house. We also looked at plats. You all can see the Lovings path, and you can see the Portabago path. Where is that Portabago path? Why am I not seeing it? Oh, I'm not seeing it because it's covered up by some Zoom stuff for me. And you can see the Hodgkins percosin, which is actually a word that means marsh. And so what we did is we put all of this data into GIS. And you can see here where we've taken this map, this plat, and we've able to fit it to, and we've been able to map where the Lovings path intersects with the Portabago path. This is actually the Portabago path that the Native people probably took when they were pushed out of Portabago down to Indian Neck. And it's taken a lot of work to do this. The credit for this belongs to Scott Strickland, who until recently worked for me. He now has a better paying job, but his GIS skills are just unparalleled. And this is how we've started to, remap this landscape. One of the things that was really useful to us, and this is where I want to share with you some of what we've been finding. I've shared it with Chief Ann. I haven't had the chance yet to show her the slide, but to give you a sense about how when you're just driving down 360 or you're just driving down 17, you are surrounded by a landscape that was meaningful to people that we don't always see in the modern day. And one of the ways we are able to figure that out is to use viewshed analysis. This is from Phones Cliffs. This is from Westmoreland Berry Farm. An unobstructed human view is about 3 miles if it's a good day. And so, you all know what viewshed is. Here's your person. And then you've got hills, right? And you've got eyes in your person. And how far can the person see? Well, the person's not going to see over here. And I'm trusting you can see the cursor. If you can't, where it says target offset, person can't see that's behind the hill. Person can see here. And so, this notion of visibility and invisibility and intervisibility is going to become key for understanding these landscapes. Now, there's a whole thing behind GIS that I barely understand. I've started to put it together, but I haven't really fully understood it until I finally took a course when Scott said he was getting a new job. We talked to the tribal members and we're like, hey, tell us where your memory does have these spiritual places. We also looked at the legacy collections. We looked where people found crystals. Where burials were, a burial in Nansatico. We looked at some of the images, where were some of these places? And we found 3 ossuaries. Ossuary is a term that means a mass grave. And sometimes when we hear mass grave, we think that it's usually a war crime. But the Algonquins used ossuaries or mass graves. They would save the bones in the temple, and then they would bury them in the ceremony. So we found, if you see the red dot, we found there was an ossuary that was discovered in 1950 at Mount Airy. This is where Newland Road crosses Cap Point Creek. In the 90s, there was an ossuary that was excavated at Land's End, which is Manzatico. And then there was burials reported at Westmoreland Berry Farm back in like the 70s. So we knew about these three places. I'm going to focus on Mount Airy, which is down by the US Rappahannock River Valley. The others I'm still working on. So here's a view of Cap Point Creek from about where the ossuary was. The ossuary is gone. It was destroyed by the construction of Newland Road, of the bridge that crosses Newland Road. But this is about where we project that the ossuary was. And you can see you've got a nice view shed there. You can see over marshes, and you can't see past trees at all. And we knew from materials that had been salvaged from the ossuary, there were a lot of shell beads. Some of these are in the Smithsonian. This is a clasp that, while to probably some English person was a clasp, the spirals and what it's made of, copper, would have been really important to Native people. You've got ochre, you've got this, what the archaeologists thought was a gorget. You've got bracelets, rings, bells. This ossuary was probably put in place sometime in the mid-17th century. Remember, I told you that the Rappahannock River Valley is pretty much left alone through the first half of the 17th century. So here is our viewshed analysis. Now I'm going to teach you to read GIS. And here's the Mount Airy ossuary. You see the white dot. Now, if you were the person standing on the white dot and you were looking down Cap Point Creek or up Cap Point Creek, the red is what you would see. So you can see almost all the way over to the left. There are places over there you can see, and then you can see up to the north. And those white dots are native sites at Minokan, and check out how they all appear to be within the viewshed. We don't think that's an accident. Now, there's not been a lot of survey in here, but there has been a lot of survey at Minokan. So we don't know what other sites are out here, but we know that this model sort of suggests, hey, yeah, you know, that these places could see the Mount Airy ossuary, and the person at the Mount Airy ossuary could see, you know, Minokan or places at Minokan. So while we're down there and we're kind of hanging out with the Fish and Wildlife folks, and you can see this is where we think the ossuary was located. It's all very different now, but there's the creek. I'm sorry, there's the bridge. We knew that over here, we had found a document from 1625, and that document said that the Great Rappahannock town was on Cap Point Creek. It wasn't called Cap Point Creek at that time, but when we modeled it, we put it about here. So we got permission from Fish and Wildlife to go out here to test it. And of course, it's not Fish and Wildlife isn't the only actor here. There's farmers. So we had to work with a farmer, and the farmer was great. Farmer's really interested in history, and we worked around him and his men, tried to get out there when the crop had come out of the ground and before the next crop went in. And lo and behold, look what we found. Now, I know it might not be super exciting. At Dumbarton Oaks, I work with a lot of people who do Mayan stuff. And so I know that to them may not be exciting, but to me, somebody who works in Virginia, very exciting. We found lots of ceramics. These are native made ceramics. You can see some decoration or surface treatment on them here as well too. We found this piece of schist that, who told me, it said this is part of a pendant. And then we found these pieces of European flint, which you're not going to have European flint before 1607. So this puts the town about the same time as the ossuary. So I was really excited because, right, you know, if you look in the viewshed and here's where we found the town and it's in the viewshed. So I was really excited. My work is done here. I can go home. I can retire. But then while at Dumbarton Oaks, I heard somebody speaking on an African kingdom. And he was looking at things like solstices and the equinox. So I went online, this is actually online, and I modeled the equinox and the solstice. Now, remember, we're approximating where the ossuary is. This is about where the town is. this, and if you look up here on the right, you'll see it's giving me a location, and I'm asking it, give me the equinox on March 20th, 2022. Everybody see that? And give it to me at 7:16, because 7:14 is when the sun rises. Now, if this said 7:14, this would still be dark because this thing models the sun. So I put it at 7:16, and check this out. Look at how that equinox line is connecting the two places. That is really exciting and really cool. So then I thought, okay, now my work is done. I can go. And this is really cool. And I have a friend, well, actually Scott, and we call Scott the dream destroyer. Like, we will tell him that we think these are our ideas, and then he rips them apart. He couldn't rip this apart. And I was loving it. I was loving it. Well, of course it makes sense, because at the equinox is when everybody's returning to their towns. During the winter, people are off in their hunting or in their hunting camps. They come back together in March and in April, right? They come back and coalesce into their towns about this time when they put the crops in the ground. So it was the more I thought about it, the more it was so clear how obvious that equinox tied these two places. There were probably all sorts of ceremonies. There was probably a lot of other stargazing going on, like the Pleiades, you know, the stars that make their trek across the sky during the winter. I'm still working on trying to include them. That there were probably fires burning at the ossuary. There may have been these kinds of wooden posts that we will never know, because the ossuary is destroyed, because in 1950, they needed gravel. That's why they dug it. They needed gravel for that road base. But it was very cool. Now, I'm not going to tell you about Westmoreland Berry Farm in Anzatico, except to say preliminary modeling is showing that, hey, something's going on up here as well, too. But what I want to come back to is Quioccasin Creek. Remember Quioccasin Creek at the beginning? So my little zoom tiles are hiding everything from me, but if you look, you'll see Mount Airy Ossuary, the Rappahannock town, and then over here is Quioccasin Creek. So for laughs and grins, I thought, well, let me see what happens with that equinox. So, well, here's Quioccasin. Well, first, before we did that, I asked Scott, I said, can you model the view shed of Quioccasin Creek? So he did, but he modeled it. We don't know where the Quioccasin was. So he modeled it from the river. Like, if you're going by the river. Now, remember, Quioccasin's are off limits to most Native people, and they're off limits to all English people. So if you're a Native person here, there is absolutely almost no view shed for you. There's view shed down here. This is marshes. And you'll have some view shed in here, but you can't see Quioccasin Creek. And actually, when I talk to people that have lived there for a long time, many people aren't even aware of Quioccasin Creek. So then that was pretty cool, you know, when he showed that it seemed hidden, right? And it's called Quioccasin Creek. Now, I will tell you, I know that this may not hold up in a court of law, but when you're an archaeologist, 2 points make a line and 3 points make a doctoral dissertation. Now, I've already got my 3 points, right? With the town and the ossuary and the sun. So just for grins, here's the equinox. Now you might say, what's this little line? This line is actually after sunrise. Sunrise, though, is here. And remember, I had to make the time, I had to adjust the time so that this was white, more light and not dark. So here's the ossuary, here's the town, and then over here is the equinox line, and about there is where it crosses Quioccasin Creek. So I was like, okay, let me check this out. Where is this? So I went immediately to the Essex County GIS property map, and it's about in here. So I clicked on to see who owned this, right? Because I'm gonna cold call them, and I'm gonna be, can I come look at your property? And I've got the name blocked out. It's public information, so I don't really need to do that, but I blocked it out anyway. I immediately knew who it was. This person had already called me and said, hey, I have all these artifacts from my family's farm up in Essex County. Would you catalog them for me? So we went and cataloged his artifacts for him. I haven't told him yet about this. He doesn't live on the property. I haven't told him yet about this, but he had over 200 projectile points. Now, in some respects, projectile points, when they're taken out of context, aren't great. But we knew where they came from, so we could put that dot on the map. But I will tell you that these projectile points they cover the entire range of native prehistory from 10,000 years ago up until about the 15th century. And it was on his property. Now, are the other properties like that? Maybe, I don't know. But he knew enough that he might have something special. He doesn't know the equinox thing. Like I said, this is hot off the presses. I described it to Chief Ann a couple weeks ago, but I'm testing you guys out. You need to be my dream destroyer, the guy who would tear it apart. Couldn't do it. So I'm gonna depend on you to come through for him. So to sort of wrap that up, well, remember Oki? Oki's the vengeful god. The good god, the creator god, was Ahone. And Ahone was believed to be the sun. And the sun was considered, the sun didn't need offerings. The sun didn't need appeasement, because the sun created things. The sun created the moon and the stars. And so, of course it would make sense. It would totally make sense that on the equinox, as the sun comes up, as people are coming back to their town, you can see the ossuary and the town, and also at the Quioccasin. Now remember that on Quioccasin Creek, it's not visible, but it doesn't mean that the equinox is not happening and that the priests there aren't seeing it. So while this is not on the equinox, I pulled over, when I was zooming across a 360 bridge last summer when we were working at phones to take this picture. I think I'm onto something. And I think what it shows us is that it's not just a single site, that there is this huge, meaningful landscape that was meaningful to Indigenous people and still is. Think about Chief Ann's story about the Quioccasin Creek. And so anyway, I'm going to wrap that up. I just want to make sure I don't go over here. These are some of the people that have helped me get to where I've been. And I am happy to answer any questions. I can stop sharing, or if we need to share for images you want to see, just let me know. So I'll turn it back over to you, Bob. And thank you all very much for entertaining my new theory.
Thank you so much. If you stop sharing, I will share a picture and ask you a question or two, if that's all right.
Okay.
Okay. So let's see if I can share my screen. There you are. So here's one question that I have. If you look at the John Smith map, based on 1608 excavation and what published in 1612, is that about right? I always wonder, here's the Rappahannock. And if you look on this side of the river, the northern neck, you see towns every couple feet almost, including right here, the three towns that were associated with the Rappahannock tribe that at Phone's Neck. So they've got three villages there. You look on this side, and there isn't anybody there except for a Piscatank somewhere around where Urbana is, though I don't think anybody's located an exact location there. So my question is, was this a group of right-handed canoers? Why is it that there is this heavy concentration on one side of the river, and on the other side of the river, there seems to be almost less activity? And even as you showed us your view sheds and other things, you have most of the communities on the northern neck, and then you have a fewer number of sites for the burial bones and other things on the Middle Peninsula. So I'll quiet and ask for reflections.
That is actually a great question. And if you want to put that back, yeah. So it's true. And a lot of people have looked at this map, and the first publication that really dealt with it was in 1907, probably as part of the 300th anniversary, right? This guy wrote about it in the American Anthropologist. And he said that the reason the towns are all on this north side is because the Powhatans are, the Powhatans are pretty, bad, right? They're aggressive, they're ambitious, they're taking over everybody, and they were going to do the same to the Rappahannock. And so all the Rappahannock nations got over on the north side, and to get sort of put the river between them. Now, Episcoptank doesn't do that, but we never hear it from it again. Well, let me ask you, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. First of all, Smith was there in the summer of 1608. So he's there when they're in their summer towns. They're not in these places all the time. And then the other thing is that why, or the way, how we understand the Powhatans today, a lot of that comes from what people wrote about the Powhatans. Well, do you think that the Powhatans were aggressive and were seemingly violent to people who had just invaded their territory? So what sort of sticks is that they're people who are defending their territory. So we did the GIS analysis, and we looked at what was going on the north side and the south side. And there was a woman, Professor Helen Roundtree. She had actually several years ago had said, hey, there's good soil, really good soil on both sides. So that really does raise the question of why there aren't big towns on the south side. And so we think that it is partly because if you look at it, there are way more marshes on the north side. There's good soil on the north side. There are more areas where you can actually get down to the river. And if you're in a canoe, you want to be able to get into the river pretty easily. It doesn't mean that the south side wasn't used. Your property has sites on it. But what it does mean is that this is a snapshot in time, and that it is probably very reflective. I actually think everybody thought Smith was a braggart, and he is a braggart. But I think he also was pretty good with what he said. I think he really did see this. And I think that what we are seeing on the left-hand side is an environmental reason and not a political reason. So, and we do know from tribal oral history, because I've talked a little bit about tribal oral history, right? What Chief Ann told me about Greckerson Creek. But the tribal oral history says we weren't enemies. The Rappahannock River wasn't a boundary. It was our main street. It was our main street. So I think that all this work that's happening in the Rappahannock River Valley, whether our interpretations stand or not, that's what scholarship's all about, right? Dream destroying. But what it does suggest is there is a whole blind spot that we need to look at. And by the way, Episcoptank, the river, William Strachey writes that the river was, I think he said the name was Episcotamek. And Ed Reagan, who is the Rappahannock tribal historian, had argued that that's related to Episcoptank, and that what you see by a renaming of the river to Rappahannock is a shift in power between this town on the south side and the Rappahannock River. I realize it's a really long answer, but it's also part of what I've been researching. I didn't mean to give another talk.
No, so I want to do just one thing, and then we'll take some other questions. And that is, I want to show one of the things that's been going on, and that is there are, I think the Virginia Department of Historic Resources has identified 89 sites where there have been digs in Middlesex County. And this is, I think, the most recent, this from a month and a half ago. And this is Mike Clem of the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. You and he have been at Locust Grove Farm in Topping. And we searched near the water on the cliffs, didn't find anything. We moved into the woods on the Whiting Creek, which is behind the Locust Grove Farm property. And every hole we dug was filled with pottery shards. And so this is the first hole we dug, and then Mike saw shards sitting on the ground, which is why we decided to start to dig there. So it's there clearly was some kind of settlement over a long period of time in that area. And as people notice in Middlesex County, you see lots of things. So either villages we haven't found yet, hunting grounds where people would be less likely to leave things, multiple possibilities, I would guess. But I want to begin fielding questions by chats. And so I'm going to read those if I can. And then if we use up the chats, then we'll open up the mics aloud. That sometimes makes it more difficult to broadcast because of the possibility of interference. But here is one message that is coming from Pat O'Bannon. I asked Chickahominy Assistant Chief Wayne Atkins how to pronounce Quickasin, and he said it was pronounced like moccasin. So Quickasin would be the way they were pronouncing it. I guess, comment?
I mean, I pronounce it Quioccasin, so it sounds like moccasin to me. Yeah.
Quioccasin. Were the Rappahannocks located in, or were the Rappahannocks located down in the Urbana area?
So I think it's important to say, in that one slide, did you say that there were 89 sites in Middlesex County that have been identified?
89 sites of any kind of archaeological digging recorded with the Virginia Department of Historic Resource. And so Mike said he thought about half of them had some sign of indigenous occupation.
So let me just say that 89 is a shockingly low number. I live in St. Mary's County, and we have like over 1,000 sites. So why is that? Now I'll answer that. Why is that? I'll tell you why it is. Because there's been no work, right? There's been no work. I mean, we have upped the counts in Essex and in Richmond County. One of the things I didn't mention is that our field work has gone from about Port Conway, which is up by the 301 bridge, Port Royal, down to just east of Warsaw. We are waiting on, I hope, funding from an agency that will let us go to the river so that we can sort of address this. But I do think you guys, no one is better than the Historical Society to raise Cain, right? About why there should be more survey in your county. Now, it's also the reason that there's not so much survey is because your county is probably not suffering the kinds of development pressures that St. Mary's County, where I live, is. I mean, we have a big naval base there, Patuxent River Naval Air Station. So, you know, looking at that hand, I guess it's your hand or maybe it's Mike's, that's a lot of Indian ceramics that come out of a single shovel test. The question, were the Rappahannocks located in the Urbana area? They were. And colleagues of mine, David Brown and Thane Harpole, who have Fairfield, the Fairfield Foundation, which I think is in Gloucester County, they've done work in Urbana and they have found some really interesting stuff. The challenge is to try to knit all this together, right? So that you can start to make these larger interpretations. So I'll give you all information. If you want to raise Cain, I'll write your notes and I'll pass them to you. And then you can, you know, go to those. I don't know if you have commissioners. We have county commissioners in St. Mary's County, but you know, let's do these surveys, because the only way you can protect these places, and that's not just indigenous sites, but sites associated with everybody, is to know where they are, right? If you know where they are, you can protect them.
Thank you. Are there any more chat questions? Well, let's try to be bold, and usually at the bottom left of your screen, you have a little microphone that says mute on it. If you have a question, you can unmute your mute button and ask the question. And then after you've asked it, I'd ask you to mute again so that we won't have the interference that comes when there are too many microphones that are open.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I was raised on the Rappahannock, on the south side of the Rappahannock, in the Punch Bowl area.
Mhm.
And I was the one who asked about the Urbana. I was just curious, is what is the best way to basically get information to somebody? Who should we go through to get the information to be able to see if we can get some more information, get it on the record? Because I know there's a tremendous amount where I was raised of native artifacts, and and all up and down the river between Punch Bowl and I know between there and Bowler's Wharf, there's a lot of stuff in there. And so I was just trying to find out what was the best way and who to contact.
That's a great question. And I see you had also said that there's people are protective about letting outsiders on their land. If it wasn't for landowners, we couldn't have done any of our work. And I will tell you guys, and you probably know this, some landowners are like, come aboard, we want to know. Other landowners, don't come aboard. And if you come aboard, you're going to get in trouble. St. Mary's College is a state agency. I mean, it's a state school. So I have to be very careful, and I never go on private property unless I know I have permission. I also carry huge umbrella policies. Nothing bad ever happens to us archaeologists. We get tick bites, but the minute there's a tick bite, I'm like, you go to the doctor. Or at one time I had a really bad case of poison ivy. But these umbrella policies, we name the landowner additional insured, right? So the landowner, who may not really be familiar with archaeology, has a certain amount of peace of mind. So if it wasn't for those property owners who I've shown you the slides of, we would never have gotten onto some of these properties. And all of the artifacts belong to the landowner. I encourage them to donate them to the state of Virginia. They can't donate them to me because we don't take artifacts. When you collect artifacts, you become responsible for those things for 1 million years, so that when people like me go to Richmond, they're still there. And I'll encourage them, but a lot of them do, some don't, many don't actually. And so, so there's all sorts of worry that if you find a site, state's going to come in, and it just does it. Maybe that happened like back in some mid 20th century day, but it doesn't. So how to record a site if you know you've got a site on your property? You do like Bob did, and you contact the DHR, Michael Clem. This is his region. If we get our funding, we're going to be through. And those of you who are interested, in having us come to your property, I'm going to put my email in the chat so that you can let me know. I mean, we can come to your property and do it. Mike Clem will come out, and you can see that he created, I can see that Bob's site is the 89th site, 44MX0089. So, MX is for Middlesex. And, can I share screen again real quickly? I'm going to share screen real quickly here. Oops, let me get out of that. All right, let me close out that, because I want to show you what happens. I want to show you what happens. All right, now we're going to go on. Everything's slow. All right. You all can see this? Can you all see my spam email? All right. Now, can you all see this? Can you see VCRIS? Does everybody see VCRIS? All right, this is the Virginia Cultural Resource Information System. So you have to be an archaeologist to get in here, and I'll tell you why. This is to protect landowners. So let me go ahead and put in my stuff, and then I'm going to bring up, let's go to, and then I have to say activate the license, whoop, and it says, tell us which license type, activate the license. Dun, dun, dun. It's not the fastest thing on the planet. And then what we're going to do, dun, 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 come on. And there it goes. All right. And look at all this. Now I'm going to go up to the DHR ID. I'm going to do 44. 44 means Virginia because it's a V. So as you go down the alphabet, you know, you get to the end. So Virginia, and then MX for Middlesex. And then I'm going to go and notice there are all these there, 0001. Let's see what 0001 is. Now, this isn't available to you guys because you have to be an archaeologist to protect landowners, right? So this thing does take a little bit of a while. Looks like that Longwood found this site. Let's see what it's telling us. It's a Native American site, early woodland, late woodland, middle woodland. Sounds like a really important site, actually. So let's see where it is. We'll go to the map, and it shows us that it is in this field somewhere in Middlesex County. Now I can, you know, do all this and everything, but I don't know who owns this, so let me get out of it. But this is the kind of information. Now let's go back and let's do 89. I'm sure Bob won't mind us looking up his site. Now, here's the deal. If we didn't want a specific site, we wanted a time period, we'd go to this. So here, let's go to search. And so Locust Grove. And here Mike says, I saw 2 sherds of pre-contact pottery on the surface. I excavated 3 shovel tests in the vicinity. It seems to indicate no plow zone and intact cultural levels, blah, 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 blah. And then he gives us a map. So he's recorded it. So you know, you get an archaeologist to record it. Bob, does this look familiar to you?
Yes, indeed.
And so, and I think this is where your historic house is. And so, and we walked all along the shore. So the state keeps this information. Now it is considered, it's not subject to FOIA. It's one of the few things in the world not subject to FOIA. And partly that is because of protecting property rights, right? And there are people out there who will go out and, you know, come onto your property in the middle of the night and dig up the site because they're trying to get stuff to sell on eBay. I rarely encounter those people. When I do, and I do from time to time, I try to get them to work with me, right? Like, why is it important not to sell this stuff? You know, why it's important to get it recorded so that we can tell stories like the town and the ossuary and the Quioccasin. I mean, that just really changes that landscape for me in a way that I kind of knew, I suspected it was out there, but to now when I drive past those places, I'm just like, oh my God, I can almost see it, you know? I can see the ghost of the people from the past. So it seems like I've answered everybody's questions though today.
So we have time for one more, and then we're going to have a closing thank you and a brief comment from Marilyn South, who is the president of the Middlesex Museum and Historical Society. One last question.
They don't want to destroy the thesis. What's up, people?
Well,
you let me down.
Thank you so much for your presentation today. And
Thank you.
Like you, I regret that Chief Ann Richardson could not be with us today, but I'm glad to know she's willing to come at another time. And we will do our best to arrange that. And we thank you for teaching us a little bit about the cultural landscape of the Rappahannock Valley and our history. And Marilyn, do you have a parting word for us?
Yes, I'd like to thank Dr. King very, very much for your presentation. And you have given me a very good piece of information with DHR and Michael Clem, because when people come in to develop the county, there is a section where it's, is this site known to have any archaeological significance? And now I have a much better sense of who to go to. Broadly, I have known some things, but thank you for that piece of information. That's very, very rich piece of information. I would like to thank the program committee, which is Bob Pritchard, Asada White, Pat Satterfield, and Dave Lee Brusham. Sometimes, well, always, it's harder to identify a subject that you think lots of people would be interested in. So the committee does do that, and it's very appreciated. And then they have to find a speaker, contact that speaker, organize the meeting, advertise the meeting, and then conduct the Zoom. So it is a project. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes research. So Dr. King, I thank you, and I thank each of our committee members. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you all very much. I would encourage you to visit the site for Middlesex County Museum to look at our other offerings. We have offerings related to marine history, to the Marine Corps, and to Juneteenth in June. And we may have a presentation, or working on a presentation about the Lost Boys of Sudan for July, and may have other programs as well. So we encourage your support and your interest and hope that continues. Thank you all very much, and goodbye.